Global warming is the greatest moral issue of our time. And I say that because how we respond to it is going to define the future. It's going to define what kind of a world the people that come after us are going to have. Everything that we do as human beings today has an effect on someone else. And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we are called to love our neighbors, love God and love our neighbors. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to pollute your neighbor's air. You won't pollute your neighbor's air or water. And if we think of neighbors as the next generation, we have to start thinking how our behavior is going to affect the people that come after us. And it's kind of sad to think that we might care more about ourselves than we do our children. And sometimes we behave that way when we're not thinking of how our behavior affects the next generation. And everything that we do in response to this global warming issue is going to affect the future. So what does it mean to be human today? How do we define ourselves in what Mary Oliver, a poet, calls the family of things? Where do we as human beings fit in this family of things? And perhaps we are not the center of the universe. When God gave us words in Scripture like dominion, and we chose to define dominion to mean exploit and use for our own purposes and not think about how our use affects the future, when we did things like that, we were not doing what God called us to do. Dominion means stewardship, care for, love for, the same kind of dominion that God has over us. And God calls us to be the best we can be. So if we have dominion over the seas and the animals and the air and the water, we're called to have all of those things be the best they can be. Scripture calls us to serve one another. If we're serving one another, we're not exploiting them. The climate issue affects poor nations and poor people around the world in a much more severe way than it does wealthier nations and wealthier people. We will all be affected by climate change, but the poor people who contribute the least to the problems are the ones that suffer the most. There are signs of behavior changing all over the world now. We're watching congregations and churches that are putting solar on the roof, that are beginning to serve as examples to communities. We're seeing our parishioners driving more fuel-efficient cars. We're seeing compact fluorescent light bulbs be installed. All of these things are cutting down on the amount of energy we use. For many, many reasons, we found that it's really better to be efficient with our energy than it is to waste it just because we can afford to do so. Therefore, I would ask you as fellow Christians to redefine what our role is in the world today in light of the destruction coming from a changing climate. When we look at rising seas, drought, crop disruption, more floods, all of these things are being caused by a changing climate. And we have a responsibility. If we're called to love our neighbors, and we're called to serve people who have less than we have, we absolutely must accept a moral responsibility to be the caretakers of creation.